Well, I wasn't sure which movie I was going to review this week, but I mentioned a few days ago that I watched We Were Soldiers, the Mel Gibson movie about the Vietnam War. And considering the fact that I was inspired to watch that movie mainly because of a video I saw on YouTube about the movie that went over the historical inaccuracies about the battle that the film portrayed, um, that pretty much took care of whatever research I would have had to do in order to do a 10 to 15-minute review that very few people are even going to care about. Um, anyway, so We Were Soldiers. It's about the La Drang Battle, which was the first real fight in Vietnam that the Americans fought that ended up being the first fight with America's involvement in Vietnam. Now, to the movie's credit, it does hint at the massacre that happened in 1954 near the end of the French Indochina conflict. Because actually, with Vietnam, it actually started in 1949, and it was more of a fight between the Vietnamese and the French, which the Vietnamese have managed to kick out before the main story of this film begins. So I thought it was a really good idea to bring that in there. And this wasn't in the video I was watching, but I knew this offhand somehow. Um, it was actually a good way to start it off to kind of say that this conflict had been going on for a while, and it wasn't just. It was a fight between the Vietnamese and outside powers, not just America. And the movie doesn't really address this. It just kind of assumes that you know that the reason that America got involved in Vietnam is that at the time it was during the Cold War, tensions were high. There was a threat of communism spreading to Vietnam, and America at the time felt like if it spreads to Vietnam, it's just going to become an epidemic in terms of policies. So we gotta go to Vietnam, stop it before it spreads anywhere else. And before we get into the actual movie, the one thing I'll say is that it was the one of the main few wars that we can say America lost. I mean, the War of 1812. Anyway, I'm gonna try and do a review. This wasn't meant to be a history vlog. So anyway, so the movie after the prologue, it cuts to 1965, where Mel Gibson is playing an actual military officer, Hal Moore. And this movie, as I said, is based on an actual story. So all these characters were real people. They're just played by actors that either look nothing or kind of like their real life counterparts. Um, the one thing that I really appreciate about the movie is that while it is a war movie, it doesn't really paint one side as one note villains or one note heroes. You do kind of see that there's honor and grace and dignity from both sides. And both of these people, you get the sense that neither side really wants to fight. They're just doing it because they feel as if they have no choice. And one of the best things that this movie does is highlight the American ego going into this war. Because in the movie says right at the beginning, you know, French army, what's that? They got beat by cavemen in black pajamas. And this is stuff they're saying in the movie. This isn't stuff I'm saying. Okay, so before you attack me for being racist, I'm just saying what they're saying in the movie. So I'm just quoting a movie. I don't believe that. Anyway, so there's a lot of stuff in the movie that you can kind of see that. I mean, Hal Moore points out, Mel Gibson's character points out all the flaws. We're fighting the enemy on their own ground. We don't really know what the environment is in. This military of which you've mocked has had several victories in the past. We're overly reliant on our resources and think that blowing them apart is going to do everything. And it even gets to the point where Hal Moore's unit gets cut down. A third of the army is cut down, but he's being sent over to Vietnam to fight. And the third they cut out are the experienced soldiers who actually know what they're doing. So Hal Moore and the Sam Elliott character are pretty much stuck with rookies in their first real fight. So, yeah, America kind of took the Northern Vietnamese army almost to the point of satirical lunacy. Like it's amazing how they thought that this war was going to be over and done with within months, and people got blown away sky high, and it got to the point where there were peace rallies and people taking dumps on Vietnam veterans who came back from the war shook already. So, I mean, how more he seemed to know, because the movie does establish that even though he is a military personnel, he's a warrior and he's intelligent. So, and he keeps talking about Custer's last stand and, oh, I'm lining my men up to a slaughterhouse. So it does at least explore more about Hal's background as a researcher and a historian as it does him as a soldier. And the movie does a really good job at being gory, but not as intensely gory as like Saving Private Ryan was. But then again, this is different, a different story that it doesn't shy away from showing how violent war is. And this was based off a book written by Hal Moore, and I think it was Joey Galloway, one of the war journalists there at the time. And writer director Randall Wallace went to some painstaking details or stakes to try and make sure that this movie did the story justice. Because as Hal Moore said in his book, Hollywood got it wrong every damn time. And I think that was probably the catalyst to motivate Randall Wallace to actually do a story that was based more in truth than historical fantasy, as with Braveheart and Pearl Harbor. But then again, and Pearl Harbor and Braveheart, Randall Wallace was only the script writer. He wasn't the director or anything because Michael Bay directed Pearl Harbor and Mel Gibson directed Braveheart. But anyway, so I feel like from what I've read and from what I've researched, the history is very well represented. But there are a few problems with the movie that they don't kill the film, but one is pretty stupid. Um, One is Hal Moore's wife, Julie, has this kind of ladies get together of all the women on base. And one of the ladies there are like, oh, don't go to the laundromat. They won't wash anything that's dark. It says whites only. It's 1965. Even if you wanted to make the argument that this lady came from a place where racial segregation wasn't a thing, she should know that in many places around the country, it is a thing. And I'm just saying, it's like everyone going into this movie, like I think they're playing up the scene as a, oh, for people who didn't know this. I think anyone walking into an R-rated war movie taking place in the 60s, I think we all know that racial segregation was very much a thing at that point. And so for someone to not realize it, that's pretty stupid. I don't know. I mean, again, I feel like they threw that in there to have an outrage over the segregation and the fact that these black soldiers were still being discriminated against, even though they were fighting in the army. I get that's what they were going for, but it just makes this character look like a dumbass. And even though she's a side character, it does kind of kill that historical accuracy bit that they were trying to keep. And yeah, I mean, like 99, like almost everyone in America apparently in this movie's universe knew about racial segregation. I think everybody knew about it. So that's one thing. Um, the scene. Before I explain my other criticism, I do say that Julia Moore. I really wish there was more of her in the movie, but she was a real badass with how she took over the moron that was trying to spread the telegrams to the army wives about men that have died, and she did it herself with her buddy, didn't complain about it and tried her best to be sort of like the mother figure to her friends, and that was really powerful stuff. I really enjoyed that. But when she and her friend went to confront one of their friends who had lost her husband in the war, they made this black actress turn into a black stereotype with her reaction the of her husband's death. If you want to have someone of a different race take in the news that their husband has died, don't turn them into a stereotypical cartoon caricature. Have some respect. And but I mean, those are two problems that it doesn't really detract from the movie. I still say you should definitely check it out because there's some great stuff in it. The fighting is really good. The tension is high, and it's even a miracle that Hal Moore's men even made it out of there. 395 soldiers against 4,000 NVA. Talk about David versus Goliath. I mean, yeah, it's amazing that they even survived. The amount of people that I think like maybe a third of them made it out. They were lucky that third, but this movie is by far probably the best historical movie Mel Gibson has been a part of. And having heard about his other historical movies, that is saying something. So hopefully you guys, well, you should definitely watch this movie. I highly recommend watching it. There are a few stupid scenes that might get you angry, but it is kind of a friendly, fun to watch film that knows when to get dark and serious and when to pull back for drama for some small jokes. So, thank you all for watching. My covers for March will be coming up this Monday, and I'm not sure what I'll be reviewing next week, but I'm sure I'll think of something. Take care.